Bienvenidos a una clase más de inglés para noveno año. Espero que estén bien y hoy vamos a ver lo que son los adverbs of frequency and expressions of frequency. Entonces, ¿qué es esto? Los adverbs of frequency are used to say how often we are doing something. On the other side, the expressions of frequency are used for the exact same thing. However, they are a little different. So we're going to see each of them more in detail. We're going to see the specific adverbs, the specific expressions, and the occasions where we can use them. And also with that, you're going to see what makes them different. So first, we have the adverbs of frequency. Let's remember that an adverb is a word that modifies verbs, adjectives, sentences, and also other adverbs. Here are some of the ones that we use the most for expressing frequency. As I said before, remember that the adverbs of frequency specifically are the ones that helps us say how often we do the action, whatever action is in the sentence. So here are the ones that we have. We have always, which is, as you know, always, all of the time, 100% of the time. Then we have usually, which means most of the time, but not completely. So, 90% of the time. We have normally, which is something that is very common. Most of the time, yes, but not totally also. Then we have often. Then we have frequently. Both of these are 70% of the time. We also have sometimes, which is half and half, right? 50%. Sometimes you do this, sometimes you don't. Then we have occasionally, which is 30% of the time. Seldom, which is like very uncommon, right? 10%. And also we have rarely and hardly ever, which means almost never. Very rarely this happens, okay? And then we have never, which is also very self-explanatory. It's never. It's 0% of the time. So how do we make sentences with these adverbs? There's several ways. So we're going to see what formulas we usually use. So first, with the verb to be. If you're going to use the verb to be as your main verb in a sentence, you have to use this formula. You have to add the adverb after this verb, after the verb to be. So that would make subject plus the verb to be plus the adverb of frequency. So for example, she is usually making bread. So she is the subject, is our main verb, the verb to be, and then we add the adverb of frequency, which is usually, and then the rest of our sentence. Then we have, in the case of any other verb, if we're not using the verb to be as the main verb, we're using any other verb that we have. This is what we do. We use subject plus the adverb plus the verb. So basically, if you see from the last sentence, we just changed the position. We exchanged the verb to be and the adverb. First, in this one, it goes first the verb and then goes the adverb. In this one, we have the adverb first and then the verb. So it's subject, adverb, verb. For example, we have he never submits the report on time. So he is the subject. The adverb of frequency would be never, and then the verb is submits, and then the rest of the sentence. Then remember last time we saw the modal verbs and the auxiliary verbs? We can incorporate them into sentences that have adverbs of frequency. And this is how we would do it. We would have the subject, then the modal verb, then the frequency adverb, and lastly, the main verb. So we have, as in this example, he should never play video games for this long. So we have he, the subject, should is the modal verb. Remember the modal verbs? Should, can, right? Remember all of them? And then we have the frequency adverb, which is never, and then play, that's the main verb. And then the rest of our sentence. And now There is a way that we can use the adverbs differently in a sentence, and is that we can put them at the very beginning. That is very normal to do. However, we cannot do this with all of the adverbs, only a few of them. The ones that we can use like this are normally, often, usually, occasionally, sometimes, and frequently. So as I said, we will have the adverb first, and then we have the subject, and then the verb. The adverbs that cannot be used at the beginning are never, ever, rarely, hardly, seldom, and always. These ones you have to use them how we previously saw, right? In the other sentence structures. This one, with the adverb at the beginning, is only for these adverbs, the ones here at the top of the screen. So here's an example. Normally, Dobby is asleep at this hour, right? Normally is one of the ones that we can use at the beginning, so we can add them at the beginning. And it is correct. Now, as usual, we can make negative statements with these adverbs. So how do we do that? We can use all of them or most of them to make negative statements. But we have to be careful with one, and that is with the word never. We cannot make a sentence in negative if we're using the word, like, we cannot conjugate it in a negative way if we're using the word never. The rest of the sentence has to be positive because the word never is doing the negation in the sentence. So here's an example so that it's more clear. This would be incorrect. I never don't watch movies. You would actually be saying that you always watch movies, right? Because you're negating the negation. So it turns positive. So this is incorrect. What you should do is I never watch movies, right? This is meaning that this is something that you don't do. The sentence is not really using don't, but because the word never is there, it adds the negation. So let's see more examples of negative statements with adverbs of frequency. We have Bruno doesn't usually behave this badly. I don't normally stay up so late. He hasn't always been like this. And I never go home in the dark. As you can see, the first three do have a negative word. Doesn't, don't, hasn't. Because they are using the other adverbs, always, usually, normally. But the one that uses never doesn't need any more negative words because the never is doing the negation. Then also we can make questions with these adverbs. So to make a question, we can follow this formula. We can add do or does, depending on the subject, then the subject, then the adverb of frequency, and lastly, the verb. So for example, we have does he usually stay working so late? Right? Does, then he is the subject, then usually is the adverb, and stay is the verb. There's something else that we can do to make questions that is very common when we are using adverbs of frequency, and is the word how often. When we ask something about frequency, and usually the answer of that will have an adverb of frequency, right? So we put the word how often to expect an answer with this adverb. So we have how often plus do or does plus the subject plus the verb. So if I say, how often do you work out? That will be how often, then do, then you is the subject, and then working out is the verb. So if I ask this question, how often do you work out? You can answer, oh, I work out always. I always work out. Or you can say, I rarely work out, or I never work out, or sometimes I work out, right? This gives you the pass to answer with an adverb of frequency. Here are some more examples of adverbs of frequency in sentences. Sometimes Jen falls asleep. See here, we can use the adverb of frequency at the beginning of a sentence. We also have, I am always happy to see you. I normally arrive early. Joseph usually orders the chicken sandwich. I never said that. I seldom ask for help. You rarely do bad on tests. Rosie travels often. Lisa frequently asks about you. And lastly, he occasionally needs me to talk. And now we have the other thing that I mentioned in the beginning, expressions of frequency. So what's the difference? The difference is that these expressions are small phrases that you can add also to express the frequency that we do something. So they have the same use at the adverbs, but whereas adverbs are, well, adverbs, and they're just words, these expressions are smaller phrases. So we usually put them at the beginning or at the end of a sentence. And that's another thing that's different from the adverbs. And there's a lot of expressions of frequency. There's an infinite amount, there's many. But I am going to give you some of the ones that are most used and that you're going to hear the most. So for example, we have this how many times a year, right? So it can be once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, 5 times a year, whatever. And it also can be times a month, times a week, times a day. So 5 times a day, 3 times a week, 10 times a month, right? We can change it however we need. Similarly, we have once a week, once a month, twice a week, twice a day, twice a year. Then we have every. It can be every day, every morning, every night, every week, every month, every year, etc. Then we have every other day, every other, if you've never heard this or if you don't know. In Spanish, when we say antier, right? Use like 2 days ago. This can be very similar to use that. So every other day, every other week, every other month, it's like 1 week yes, 1 week no, 1 week yes. So if they ask you, how often do you work out? You can say, oh, every other week. So I work out this week. Perhaps the next one I don't, then the next one I do, and so on and so forth. Then we have daily, monthly, weekly, yearly. Then we have once in a while. So like sometimes, but also once in a while. From time to time, most of the time. This is like saying the ones that we saw. You remember the adverbs? Here is like saying usually or normally. That could also be changed with most of the time. It's not always, but it's a big portion of the time. Then we have one of these days, weeks, months, all the time. This is also interchangeable with always and all of the time. And we have every now and then. So sometimes. And here are some examples with these expressions. I go to bed early once in a while. Bob takes his dog out for a walk daily. I go to the dentist twice a year. I watch TV every other day. We see each other once a month. And most of the time he's busy at work. Y eso sería todo por hoy. Espero que hayan entendido y disfrutado de la clase de hoy. Y los veo en la próxima clase. Espero que estén bien. Hasta luego.